This is the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. I'm going to get into another book. Now, it's actually a long essay, rather. And it's online. You can access this for free. And all the other works by this extremely assiduous researcher off of his website for free. And they're worth more than probably... One of his essays is probably worth more than any other book on your bookshelf. Seriously. And yet you can access this for free. I printed up all of his essays and have them arranged like books just on regular printer paper, one-sided, because my printer only does one side, but I got them all on my bookshelf. They are a prized possession, really. I want to say I can't believe what this researcher found out, and his cohort found the same thing out independently, and they both share the same website. I originally didn't believe it. It took some prodding from my good buddy Visigoth to convince me, because I started to have one of those knee-jerk reactions again. When I first heard this stuff, I thought, come on, this is baloney, this is crazy. Same reaction I had when I heard the stuff about the Vatican murdering, being at the top of the conspiracy to murder Abraham Lincoln. And all of our other presidents who've ever been poisoned. I had that same knee-jerk, purely emotional reaction that blocks out your intellectual process. And doggone it, it's the same reaction that your average Joe has when you tell him anything truthful that's not in the mainstream news, and that's basically anything truthful. And then they jump to that knee-jerk, purely emotional, anti-intellectual, anti-cerebral reaction, and they tell you, oh, that's a conspiracy theory. Yeah, and that just shows how much he's brainwashed, yada, yada, yada. But I had that a couple of times. I even after I was mostly, I would say, awakened to the reality of the world around us. And it took Visigoth both times to take me aside and say, bro, you need to do the homework before you make a decision on this. Don't just make a decision out of ignorance, basically. And coming from a guy like that, that really brought me up short. And I went and did the research. And I found out the guy, oh man, it was true, and the wizard is behind the curtain, and the wizard is more mysterious and elaborate and larger than life, and that wizard behind the curtain gets bigger all the time. Wow. Another thing Visigoth and I have noticed, though, together, very, very few people, even amongst those who listen to folks like us and come on our shows and write books and show they're mostly awake, they know the reality of the world, that the whole world lies in delusion. Nevertheless, even those people, when they come across something that's too outrageous, they shut down, just like I started to do, and Viz helped me through both times. People just shut down and they can't deal with it, and they dismiss it just out of pure emotions and complete lack of gray matter. So that even happens, and it's happened a few times with former guests of mine and Biz, and we just kind of let those people go their ignorant way until they wake up, because they wouldn't listen to us. They wouldn't stop their emotional reaction and do their homework. And anyway, I think I mentioned last month there were a couple of listeners who came up and visited me, and we had black and tans and cigars and at the local Irish pub here, and it was great. It was great talking to two brothers about stuff that men are too damn ignorant to know anymore. The truth, men in America. But one of them alerted me and sent me the link to a book. and I had planned on getting into that book with the next one. I'm going to get to that book next, after this one, because that book does appear very significant. Now, that's a real book. That's a good-sized book, and it's out of print from the 1800s. And, boy, he knows what it is, and it deals with familiar subject matter to this show and all of that. But anyway, with this book, with this essay, I need to read this. This guy has actually, this researcher, his name is James Montgomery. He and his researching cohort, the Informer, independently, completely, for years, prior to having met at least, they came to the same conclusion from years of very painstaking research in law libraries and places, university libraries, I suppose, but they, researching old documents, they basically proved that as the title of this essay tells, the United States is still a British colony. And this guy, James Montgomery, you go to atgpress.com. It stands for againstthegrainpress.com. Click on, well, you can click on the Informer. He tells you the same stuff through a lot of essays. I prefer, and the same stuff, that's right. I prefer clicking on Knowledge is Freedom, and then you get to the work of this guy, James Montgomery. James Montgomery is noticeably better at editing. Both of them could use a proofreader, an editor, because they didn't have one. And any person who writes a book, whether anybody, you need an editor. But when you're a small-time, one-horse operation and you're writing, that's all you got yourself. And so there's going to be type errors. There's going to be grammatical errors. And there's a few here with James Montgomery. I just found that there's a lot with the Informer, and at times, although his research is impeccable, it makes it hard to read. I know the Informer harps on the importance of diagramming sentences in school, and I don't know, it's a little hypocritical because he doesn't really write that well. He can't diagram his own sentences, basically, as he's writing them. Anyway, he means well. His research is fantastic. He needs help in his writing, the Informer. James Montgomery is a little more clear. He's a better writer, basically. They're both about the same as far as researching power, researching depth. Now, and both of them have written numerous articles, numerous long essays documenting all of this. This is just one, and it's entitled, again, "The United States is Still a British Colony." Maybe it's just the title that makes this essay jump out the most at the online viewer. Nevertheless, all of the articles on there. Go to atgpress.com, click on Knowledge is Freedom, read the research articles of James Montgomery. There's a wealth of materials there, and they all are fantastic and in-depth. And guess what? They're all irrefutable. Trust me. You'll find out. You'll get the upset stomach. You'll get nauseated. You've been lied to, folks. The United States is still a British colony. And so this is the essay we are going to get into on the Ministry of Truth. Now, the reason I want to take a detour and read this, I didn't plan on reading this next, but I've been hearing people close to me, people I trust, people who are dear friends of mine, companions, cohorts, and brothers in the faith of mine who I hear them starting to appeal to the Constitution again. And that troubles me because they have heard some of this material. So I decided, well, you obviously haven't read it in any depth, or else you would not be appealing to the Constitution, even though you've been told a number of times now by the legendary Visigoth and myself that the Constitution was a fraud. a total fraud. The Founding Fathers were lawyers, they were liars, they were frauds. They sold out their own people. The United States, the colonies, never won the Revolutionary War. It was a backdoor Masonic deal to limit the battle damage, make it look like a war, and keep the profits going for England and for the wealthy, elitist, lawyerly families like the founding quote-unquote fathers in the colonies. And basically, the reason it appeared for so long that Americans had these rights and so-called rights and freedoms for so long, for a few decades anyway, after the Revolutionary War, it was mostly to do with geography, folks. It was not in the documents of the Constitution. The Constitution does not apply to the common man, as we're about to find out. Not even the Declaration of Independence applied to the common man, as we are about to find out. And if you go back in history, things like even the Magna Carta, they're worthless documents. They're worth about the same as a toilet paper roll, the Magna Carta was. Completely worthless. James Montgomery will show you. He documents it. For one thing, this King John that was forced by the nobles in England to sign the Magna Carta. Well, the Pope immediately declared the Magna Carta null and void. And King John, by the way, a few years prior had given England to the Pope. So England was not King John's to give away to these barons, these noblemen, forcing at sword point the Magna Carta upon King John. And here, there you go. It's a document signed under duress. And even today, we know a document signed under duress is not a legal document. So the Magna Carta was worthless. Basically, folks, here it is in a nutshell. I hope I can get it down to that. Folks, the common man, you have no rights except for those that Jesus Christ gave you as a saved soul, but He liberated your soul if you will take the sacrifice, take the opportunity He gave you. But your body is not going to have any actual rights until Jesus Christ returns and rules the earth with a rod of iron. Until then, everything you have that you think are rights, they are actually privileges. And that we're in slavery. We always have been. And it's remarkable that even people who get it, even people who are very close to me, who know that everything's a fraud around us, the whole world lies in a strong delusion that because of our sinful ways, God has given us over unto. And Satan loves deceiving the whole world. And Revelation tells us that. He's got the whole world deluded, does Satan. And everything on your mainstream news. Flip it upside down if you want the truth. 9/11 was a fraud. The Oklahoma City bombings was a fraud. Korean airline 007 that was shot down in Russia was a fraud. Nothing TWA 800 that was shot down off the coast of New Jersey. That was a fraud. Pearl Harbor, the Lusitania, the explosion of the Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, on and on and on. The stock market crash, the Federal Reserve. Even people who know that all of those are frauds and the truth is almost completely reverse what mainstream news tells us, even those who get it and are Christian, even those, and they've been guests on my show, really except for Viz, they all still will hearken back occasionally to this Constitution as being somehow a fount of liberty for Americans, and they don't know that it's completely faulty. They should know better, basically, is what I'm trying to say, because the Constitution, you're still dealing there with man's law. It's weird. The propaganda you're fed in school about the founding fathers, the framers of the Constitution, it's like people who really get it, and already you're in rarefied company if you get it and you understand that history is a fraud. And then, if you understand that the Bible, that God's Word is true, the real God's Word. I mean, aren't very many people who do that, but once you get to that point, it's weird. Even those people will still latch on. They'll say, yeah, all history's been a fraud, basically. And the only thing we can trust is God's true Word. However, there was this one time in history, this one completely atypical time, when you had a few honorable lawyers get together in colonial America and write this wonderful document to set mankind free. That was the one time when mankind became noble. The one time when lawyers became noble. That was it, the one time. And they were, come on. Doesn't that right there, the picture I just painted, all of mankind's history, all of mankind's laws, it's all about tyranny, and prophets is what it's really all about, prophets. But there was this one time when that didn't apply. The U.S. Revolution, the Revolutionary War and the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. That was the one time where mankind became noble. Stop and think about that. Would the Lord really allow that to happen? Allow there to be one time in history where elitist humans suddenly became not elitists and became truthful and told the truth and weren't about profits and wanted to rule a country not about profits. They weren't driven just by profits. They wanted to be truthful as God's Word is truthful. Do you think God would really allow that to happen? No. All of mankind's history. In the Constitution, it set up a Calvinist republic. Oh, really? Mm-hmm. How many times does it mention Jesus Christ in the document? 0. Okay, how many times does the Declaration of Independence mention Jesus Christ? 0. Okay, but it mentions God and Lord. Well, gee, the founding framers were mostly Freemasons, and the Freemasons have their God and Lord, who is actually the ancient Baal deity, and they now call him the great architect of the universe. But it's no different than ancient Bel or Baal worship. It's just amazing. It's so frustrating. Well, anyway, that's why, belatedly, I'm telling you, I'm finally getting to the point. This is why I have to read this. You folks, you need to listen. If you have any faith in the Constitution, stop and listen to this, please. I took the trouble of doing my homework in this area. I took the trouble of spending my money on paper and ink, printing all of this up, the voluminous essays from both the Informer and James Montgomery. It fills up half a bookshelf, half a long bookshelf in my office room that's running out of room. And I read them all, and I highlighted them all as I read. I made notes on them all. And I'm telling you, even if you just listen, stop what you're doing and listen to just this one article by James Montgomery, you'll be totally convinced. It's irrefutable. The Constitution was a fraud. The founding framers were lawyers. They were frauds. The Declaration of Independence did not ever apply to the common American, you and me. It was a corporate deal, a Masonic corporate backdoor lawyer deal. And the United States is still a British colony. This was written in 1996 by James Montgomery. The trouble with history is, we weren't there when it took place, and it can be changed to fit someone's belief and or traditions. Or it can be taught in the public schools to favor a political agenda and withhold many facts. I know you have been taught that we won the Revolutionary War and defeated the British, but I can prove to the contrary. I want you to read this paper with an open mind and allow yourself to be instructed with the following verifiable facts. You be the judge, and don't let prior conclusions on your part or incorrect teaching keep you from the truth. I, too, was always taught in school and in studying our history books that our freedom came from the Declaration of Independence and was secured by our winning the Revolutionary War. I'm going to discuss a few documents that are included at the end of this paper in the footnotes. The first document is the first Charter of Virginia in 1606. See footnote 1. In the first paragraph, the King of England granted our forefathers license to settle and colonize America. The definition for license is as follows, from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914, quote, "In government regulation, authority to do some act or carry on some trade or business, in its nature lawful, but prohibited by statute, except with the permission of the civil authority, or which would otherwise be unlawful," unquote. Keep in mind, those that came to America from England were British subjects. So you can better understand what I'm going to tell you, here are the definitions for subject and citizen. Again, Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914. Quote, "In monarchical governments, by subject is meant one who owes permanent allegiance to the monarch," unquote. The following is from the 5th edition of Black's Law Dictionary. Quote, "Constitutional law, one that owes allegiance to a sovereign and is governed by his laws. The natives of Great Britain are subjects of the British government. Men in free governments are subjects as well as citizens. As citizens, they enjoy rights and franchises. As subjects, they are bound to obey the laws. The term is little used in this sense in countries enjoying a republican form of government," unquote. I chose to give the definition for subject first, so you could better understand what definition of citizen is really being used in American law. Below is the definition of citizen from Roman law, from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914. Quote, "The term citizen was used in Rome to indicate the possession of private civil rights, including those accruing under the Roman family and inheritance law, and the Roman contract and property law. All other subjects were peregrines. But in the beginning of the 3rd century, the distinction was abolished, and all subjects were citizens," unquote. The king was making a commercial venture when he sent his subjects to America and used his money and resources to do so. I think you would admit the king had a lawful right to receive gain and prosper from his venture. In the Virginia Charter, he declares his sovereignty over the land, and his subjects, and in paragraph 9 he declares the amount of gold, silver, and copper he is to receive, if any is found by his subjects. There could have just as easily been none, or his subjects could have been killed by the Indians. This is why this was a valid right of the king. See Black's 4th edition, Jure Coronae, quote, in the right of the crown, unquote. The king expended his resources with the risk of total loss. If you'll notice in paragraph 9, the king declares that all his heirs and successors were to also receive the same amount of gold, silver, and copper that he claimed with this charter. The gold that remained in the colonies was also the king's. He provided the remainder as a benefit for his subjects, which amounted to further use of his capital. You will see in this paper that not only is this valid, but it is still in effect today. If you will read the rest of the Virginia Charter, you will see that the king declared the right and exercised the power to regulate every aspect of commerce in his new colony. A license had to be granted for travel connected with transfer of goods, i.e. commerce, right down to the furniture they sat on. A great deal of the king's declared property was ceded to America in the Treaty of 1783. I want you to stay focused on the money and the commerce which was not ceded to America. This brings us to the Declaration of Independence. Our freedom was declared because the king did not fulfill his end of the covenant between king and subject. The main complaint was taxation without representation, which was reaffirmed in the early 1606 charter granted by the king. It was not a revolt over being subject to the King of England. Most wanted the protection and benefits provided by the king. Because of the king's refusal to hear their demands and grant relief, separation from England became the lesser of two evils. The cry of freedom and self-determination became the rallying cry for the colonist. The slogan, "Don't tread on me," was the standard borne by the militias. The Revolutionary War was fought and concluded when Cornwallis surrendered to Washington at Yorktown. As Americans, we have been taught that we defeated the king and won our freedom. The next document I will use is the Treaty of 1783, which will totally contradict our having won the Revolutionary War. See footnote 2. I want you to notice in the first paragraph that the king refers to himself as Prince of the Holy Roman Empire and of the United States. You know from this that the United States did not negotiate this treaty of peace in a position of strength and victory, but it is obvious that Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, and John Adams negotiated a treaty of further granted privileges from the King of England. Keep this in mind as you study these documents. You also need to understand the players of those that negotiated this treaty. For the Americans, it was Benjamin Franklin, Esquire, a great patriot and standard-bearer of freedom. Or was he? His title includes Esquire. An esquire, in the above usage, was a granted rank and title of nobility by the king, which is below knight and above a yeoman or common man. An esquire is someone that does not do manual labor as signified by this status. See the below definitions from Blackstone's commentaries, quote, "Esquires, by virtue of their offices as justices of the peace, and others who bear any office of trust under the crown, for whosoever studieth the laws of the realm, who studieth in the universities, who professeth the liberal sciences, and who can live idly and without manual labor, and will bear the port, charge, and countenance of a gentleman, he shall be called master, and he shall be taken for a gentleman," unquote. The following is from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. Quote, "Esquire, in English law, a title of dignity next above gentleman and below knight. Also, a title of office given to sheriffs, sergeants, and barristers at law, justices of the peace, and others," unquote. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay, as you can read in the treaty, were all esquires, and were the signers of this treaty, and the only negotiators of the treaty. The representative of the king was David Hartley, Esquire. Benjamin Franklin was the main negotiator for the terms of the treaty. He spent most of the war traveling between England and France. The use of Esquire declared his and the others' British subjection and loyalty to the crown. In the first article of the treaty, most of the king's claims to America are relinquished, except for his claim to continue receiving gold, silver, and copper as gain for his business venture. Article 3 gives Americans the right to fish the waters around the United States and its rivers. In Article 4, the United States agreed to pay all bona fide debts. If you will read my other papers on money, you will understand that the financiers were working with the king. Why else would he protect their interest with this treaty? Side note, boy, does that ever dovetail with the last book I just completed, The Babylonian Woe by David Astle, where Astle is always remarking on the shadowy powers, the powers behind the throne. The money powers are always there in any civilization. They're the real powers, but you never see them, or you seldom see them. But the front man, whatever king or tyrant they put forth, will always look out for them, will always protect them. And here we go, the King of England protecting their interests in the Treaty of 1783. Okay. I wonder if you have seen the main and obvious point. This treaty was signed in 1783. The war was over in 1781. If the United States defeated England, how is the King of England granting rights to America when we were now supposedly his equal in status? We supposedly defeated him in the Revolutionary War. So why would these supposed patriot Americans sign such a treaty when they knew that this would void any sovereignty gained by the Declaration of Independence and the Revolutionary War? If we had won the Revolutionary War, the king granting us our land would not be necessary. It would have been ours by his loss of the Revolutionary War. To not dictate the terms of a peace treaty in a position of strength after winning a war means the war was never won. Think of other wars we have won, such as when we defeated Japan. Did General MacArthur allow Japan to dictate to him the terms for surrender? No way. All these men, these quote-unquote founding fathers, all they did is gain status and privilege granted by the king and ensure the subjection of future unaware generations. Worst of all, they sold out those that gave their lives and property for the chance to be free. You know, that totally ties in today with the wars going on overseas, the wars for empire in Afghanistan and Iraq. Who's largely, foolishly, pathetically sending their boys off to be, and now they're girls, and now they're daughters. How tragically, how insultingly, the ignorance, the shamefulness of it. But who's sending their children off to be cannon fodder nowadays? Oh, it's the patriotic Americans who call themselves Christians by and large, isn't it? Come on, you know you've met them. Come on, they got flags up on their cars, and they have a constitution that they've never read, and they got a Bible that they've never read, but boy, they're Christians and they're patriot Americans, aren't they? And they're sending their boys and now girls overseas to be cannon fodder. Well, guess what? You hear these stories in the Revolutionary War of, was it the Black Brigade? The preachers in the colonies who led up the militias and had called out the militias and the Minutemen to go fight the British. And they did a stellar job on the battlefield. What they did was totally brave. However, they were also completely sold out, and it accomplished nothing because they were sold out at the top. And so even you see back then, Christians picking up the sword, picking up the rifle to go and fight. And all it gets them is killed and sold out and taken advantage of back then, because their leaders back then sold them out. And it's still happening today. Foolish Christians or people calling themselves Christians are fighting the battles of the oligarchs. They're fighting the battles of the enemy, of Satan. And yet they're Christian, at least calling themselves Christian, and maybe, well, I'm sure some of them, a lot of them are. Anyway, history doesn't change. Think of your redneck Christian over there fighting for democracy and liberty in Afghanistan. That's what you had fighting the revolution, the Revolutionary War then. Anyway, here we go. Back to the essay. When Cornwallis surrendered to Washington, he surrendered the battle, folks, but he did not surrender the war. Read the article of capitulation signed by Cornwallis at Yorktown. See footnote 3. Jonathan Williams recorded in his book Legions of Satan, printed in 1781, that Cornwallis revealed to Washington during his surrender that, quote, a holy war will now begin on America, and when it is ended, America will be supposedly the citadel of freedom, but her millions will unknowingly be subjects to the crown. In less than 200 years, the whole nation will be working for divine world government. That government that they believe to be divine will be the British Empire, unquote. Wow, was that really written in 1781? Apparently so, folks. All the treaty did was remove the United States as a liability and obligation of the king. He no longer had to ship material and money to support his subjects and colonies. At the same time, he retained financial subjection through debt owed after the treaty, which is still being created today, millions of dollars a day, and his heirs and successors are still reaping the benefit of the king's original venture. That, folks, that means that in the 1980s, when you saw that big extravagant wedding on all the channels in America of Princess Di's wedding to Prince Charles, I hope you enjoyed that because we paid for it. You paid for it, folks. Yes, we'll get to that. We'll get to the proof on that. If you will read the following quote from Title 26, you will see just one situation where the king is still collecting a tax from those that receive a benefit from him on property which is purchased with the money the king supplies at almost the same percentage. Ooh, boy. Next up is some IRS legalese. Should I get into that? I'll get into a little bit. Cite 26 U.S.C. Section 1491. Head Section 1491, Imposition of Tax. Statute. There is hereby imposed on the transfer of property by a citizen or a resident of the United States, or by a domestic corporation or partnership, or by an estate or trust which is not a foreign estate or trust, to a foreign corporation as paid in surplus, or as a contribution to capital, or to a foreign estate or trust, or to a foreign partnership, an excise tax equal to 35% of the excess of 1, the fair market value of the property so transferred, over 2, the sum of A, the adjustment basis for determining gain of such property in the hands of the transferor, plus B, the amount of the gain recognized to the transferor at the time of the transfer, source, yada, 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 amendments, yada, 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 all these legalese. Oh, boy. This is it, man. This is why Jesus condemned these people, writing this parallel, bizarro world language that only they can understand and that they twist with situational ethics each time they read it. It's vague, abstruse legalese. Let's, effective date, 1976 amendment. Okay, going forward. Here we go. A new war was declared when the treaty was signed. The king wanted his land back, and he knew he would be able to regain his property for his heirs with the help of his world financiers. Here is a quote from the king speaking to Parliament after the Revolutionary War had concluded. This is 6 weeks after the capitulation of Yorktown. The King of Britain, in his speech to Parliament, November 27th, 1781, declared, quote, that he should not answer the trust committed to the sovereign of a free people if he consented to sacrifice either to his own desire of peace or to their temporary ease and relief those essential rights and permanent interests upon the maintenance and preservation of which the future strength and security of the country must forever depend, unquote. The determined language of this speech, pointing to the continuance of the American war, was echoed back by a majority of both Lords and Commons. In a few days after, on December 12th, it was moved in the House of Commons that a resolution should be adopted declaring it to be their opinion, quote, that all farther attempts to reduce the Americans to obedience by force would be ineffectual and injurious to the true interests of Great Britain, unquote. The rest of the debate can be found in footnote 4. What were the true interests of the king, the gold, silver, and copper? The new war was to be fought without Americans being aware that a war was even being waged. It was to be fought by subterfuge and key personnel being placed in key positions. The first two parts of my other essay, A Country Defeated in Victory, that's another great essay James Montgomery wrote, A Country Defeated in Victory. It's about the Revolutionary War. Go into detail about how this was done and exposes some of the main players. Every time you pay a tax, you are transferring your labor to the king, and his heirs and successors are still receiving interest from the original American charters. The following is the definition of tribute or tax. Quote, a contribution which is raised by a prince or sovereign from his subjects to sustain the expenses of the state. A sum of money paid by an inferior sovereign or state to a superior potentate to secure the friendship or protection of the latter. Unquote. This from Black's Law Dictionary, 4th edition. As further evidence, not that any is needed, a percentage of taxes that are paid are to enrich the King or Queen of England. For those that study Title 26, you will recognize IMF, which means Individual Master File. All taxpayers have one. To receive one, you have to be able to break their codes using File 6209, which is about 467 pages. On your IMF, you will find a blocking series which tells you what type of tax you are paying. You will probably find a 300 to 399 blocking series, which 6209 says is reserved. You then look up the BMF 300 to 399, which is the Business Master File in 6209. You would have seen prior to 1991, this was US/UK tax claims non-refile DLN, meaning everyone is considered a business and involved in commerce, and you are being held liable for a tax via a treaty between the US and the UK payable to the UK. The form that is supposed to be used for this is Form 8288, FIRTA, Foreign Investment Real Property Tax Account. You won't find many people using this form, just the 1040 form. The 8288 form can be found in the Law Enforcement Manual of the IRS, Chapter 3. If you will check the OMB's paper, Office of Management and Budget, in the Department of Treasury, list of active information collections approved under Paperwork Reduction Act, you will find this form under OMB number 1545-0902, which says U.S. withholding tax return for dispositions by foreign persons of U.S. real property interests statement of withholding on dispositions by foreign persons of U.S. Form number 8288, number 8288A. These codes have since been changed to read as follows. IMF 300 to 309, Barred Assessment, CP 55, generated valid for MFT 30, which is the code for 1040 form. IMF 310 to 399 reserved. The BMF 300 to 309 reads the same as IMF 300 to 309. BMF 390 to 399 reads US/UK tax treaty claims. The long and short of it is nothing's changed. The government just made it plainer. The 1040 is the payment of a foreign tax to the King or Queen of England. We have been in financial servitude since the Treaty of 1783. Read 'em and weep, folks. Read 'em and weep. Another treaty between England and the United States was Jay's Treaty of 1794, footnote 5. If you will remember from the Paris Treaty of 1783, John Jay, Esquire, was one of the negotiators of the treaty. In 1794, he negotiated another treaty with Britain. There was great controversy among the American people about this treaty. In Article 2, you will see the king is still on land that was supposed to be ceded to the United States at the Paris Treaty. This is 13 years after America supposedly won the Revolutionary War. I guess someone forgot to tell the King of England. In Article 6, the king is still dictating terms to the United States concerning the collection of debt and damages. The British government and world bankers claimed that we owe. In Article 12, we find the king dictating terms again, this time concerning where and with who the United States could trade. In Article 18, the United States agrees to a wide variety of material that would be subject to confiscation if Britain found said material going to its enemies' ports. Wait a minute. Who won the Revolutionary War? That's right. We were conned by some of our early forefathers into believing that we are free, that we are a sovereign people, when in fact we had the same status as before the Revolutionary War. I say had because our status today is far worse now than then. I will explain. Early on in our history, the king was satisfied with the interest made by the Bank of the United States. But when the bank charter was canceled in 1811, it was time to gain control of the government in order to shape government policy and public policy. Have you never asked yourself why the British, after burning the White House and all our early records during the War of 1812, why they left and did not take over the government? The reason they did as much as they did do was to remove the greatest barrier to their plans for this country. That barrier was the newly adopted 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution. The purpose for this amendment was to stop anyone from serving in the government who was receiving a title of nobility or honor. It was and is obvious that these government employees would be loyal to the grantor of the title of nobility or honor. The War of 1812 served several purposes. It delayed the passage of the 13th Amendment by Virginia, allowed the British to destroy the evidence of the first 12 states' ratification of this amendment, and it increased the national debt, which would coerce Congress to reestablish the bank charter in 1816 after the Treaty of Ghent was ratified by the Senate in 1815. We'll stop there for this time, and we will get into this forgotten amendment, the original 13th Amendment, next time, and your heads will flip. You will probably freak out when you hear this. The original 13th Amendment had nothing to do with the 13th Amendment that you know of today. Nothing at all. And it's the real main reason for the War of 1812. This is completely Twilight Zone-ish, erased, memory hold history you are learning, and it's about to get a whole lot weirder next time. On the Ministry of Truth, we have been reading America is Still a British Colony by James Montgomery. This has been the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. Over and out. This is the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. Time for part 2 of The United States is Still a British Colony by James Montgomery. The Forgotten Amendment. The Articles of Confederation, Article 6 states, quote, "Nor shall the United States in Congress assembled," and United is not capitalized, by the way, "or any of them grant any title of nobility," unquote. The Constitution for the United States, United not capitalized, in Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8 states, quote, "No title of nobility shall be granted by the United States," United not capitalized, "and no person holding any office or profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of the Congress, accept any of the present emolument, office, or title, or of any kind whatever, from any king, prince, or foreign state," unquote. Also, Section 10, Clause 1 states, quote, "No state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder, ex post facto of law impairing the obligation of contracts, or grant any title of nobility," unquote. There was, however, no measurable penalty for violation of the above sections. Congress saw this as a great threat to the freedom of Americans and our Republican form of government. In January 1810, Senator Reed proposed the original 13th Amendment. And it has nothing to do with the 13th Amendment you know of today. The original 13th Amendment, and on April 26, 1810, was passed by the Senate 26-1, and by the House 87-3 on May 1st, 1810, and submitted to the 17 states for ratification. The amendment read as follows, quote, "If any citizen of the United States shall accept, claim, receive, or retain any title of nobility or honor, or shall, without the consent of Congress, accept and retain any present, pension, office, or emolument of any kind whatever from any emperor, king, prince or foreign power, such person shall cease to be a citizen of the United States and shall be incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under them or either of them." Unquote. From An American Dictionary of the English Language, first edition, by Noah Webster, 1828. The definition of nobility is, the third definition, the quality, quote, "the qualities which constitute distinction of rank in civil society, according to the customs or laws of the country, that eminence or dignity which a man derives from birth or title conferred, and which places him in an order above common men." And the fourth definition, "the persons collectively who enjoy rank above commoners, i.e. the peerage." Unquote. The aforementioned sections in the Constitution for the United States and the above proposed 13th Amendment sought to prohibit the above definition, which would give any advantage or privilege to some citizens an unequal opportunity to achieve or exercise political power. 13 of the 17 states listed below understood the importance of this amendment. The following states voted for the amendment between the years 1810 and 1819. How is that possible? Well, anyway, Maryland, Kentucky, Ohio, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Vermont, Tennessee, Georgia, North Carolina, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Virginia all voted in favor of the original 13th Amendment, with 4 states against: New York, Connecticut, South Carolina, Rhode Island. Okay. On March 10th, 1819, the Virginia legislature passed Act Number 280, Virginia Archives of Richmond Miscellaneous File, page 299, for microfilm. This guy did his homework. He's looking up microfilm in the legal law archives of the states. Okay, the following, quote, "Be it enacted by the General Assembly that there shall be published an edition of the laws of this Commonwealth, in which shall be contained the following matters, that is to say, the Constitution of the United States and the amendments thereto," unquote. And United is not capitalized. The official day of ratification was March 12, 1819. This was the date of republication of the Virginia Civil Code. Virginia ordered 4,000 copies, almost triple their usual order. Word of Virginia's 1819 ratification spread throughout the states, and both Rhode Island and Kentucky published the new amendment in 1822. Ohio published the new amendment in 1824. Maine ordered 10,000 copies of the Constitution with the new amendment to be printed for use in the public schools, and again in 1831 for their census edition. Indiana published the new amendment in the Indiana Revised Laws of 1831 on page 20. The Northwest Territories published the new amendment in 1833. Ohio published the new amendment again in 1831 and in 1833. Connecticut, one of the states that voted against the new amendment, published the new amendment in 1835. Wisconsin Territory published the new amendment in 1839. Iowa Territory published the new amendment in 1843. Ohio published the new amendment again in 1848. Kansas published the new amendment in 1855, and Nebraska Territory published the new amendment 6 years in a row from 1855 to 1860. Colorado Territory published the new amendment in 1865 and again 1867. In the 1867 1807 printing, the present 13th Amendment, the Slavery Amendment, was listed as the 14th Amendment. The repeated reprinting of the amended United States Constitution is conclusive evidence of its passage. Also, as evidence of the new 13th Amendment's impending passage, on December 2nd, 1817, John Quincy Adams, then Secretary of State, wrote to Buck, an attorney, regarding the position Buck had been assigned. The letter reads, quote, "If it should be the opinion of this government that the acceptance on your part of the commission under which it was granted did not interfere with your citizenship, it is the opinion of the executive that under the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, by the acceptance of such an appointment from any foreign government, a citizen of the United States ceases to enjoy that character and becomes incapable of holding any office of trust or profit under the United States or either of them." Unquote from John Quincy Adams. By virtue of these titles and honors and special privileges, lawyers have assumed political and economic advantages over the majority of citizens. You ever wonder, folks, why all of Congress are lawyers? This is why. And they've flushed the original 13th Amendment down the memory hole. That was the amendment that would have stripped them of their citizenship and got them thrown out of this country. They have the nobility, the title of nobility, as an esquire, which shows their allegiance to the King of England. Back to the essay. A majority may vote, but only a minority, lawyers, may run for political office today. After the War of 1812 was concluded, the Treaty of Ghent was signed and ratified. See footnote 6. In Article 4 of the treaty, the United States gained what was already given in the Treaty of Paris in 1783, namely, islands off the U.S. coast. Also, 2 men were to be given the power to decide the borders and disagreements. If they could not, the power was to be given to an outside sovereign power, and their decision was final and considered conclusive. In Article 9, it is admitted there are citizens and subjects in America. As you have seen, the 2 terms are interchangeable, synonymous. In Article 10, you will see where the idea for the overthrow of this country came from and on what issue. The issue raised by England was slavery, and it was nurtured by the king's emissaries behind the scenes. This would finally lead to the Civil War, even though the Supreme Court had declared the states and their citizens' property rights could not be infringed on by the United States government or Congress. This was further declared by the following presidential quotes, where they declared to violate the states' rights would violate the U.S. Constitution. Also, history shows that slavery would not have existed much longer in the southern states. Public sentiment was changing, and slavery was quickly disappearing. The Civil War was about destroying property rights and the U.S. Constitution, which supported these rights. Read the following quotes of presidents just before the Civil War. Quote, "I believe that involuntary servitude, as it exists in different states of this Confederacy, is recognized by the Constitution. I believe that it stands like any other admitted right, and that the states where it exists are entitled to efficient remedies to enforce the constitutional provisions. That's from Franklin Pierce's inaugural address, 1853, unquote. Quote, "The whole territorial question being thus settled upon the principle of popular sovereignty, a principle as ancient as free government itself, everything of a practical nature has been decided. No other question remains for adjustment, because all agree that under the Constitution, slavery in the states is beyond the reach of any human power except that of the respective states themselves wherein it exists." Unquote. That from James Buchanan's inaugural address, 1857. Quote, "I cordially congratulate you upon the final settlement by the Supreme Court of the United States of the question of slavery in the territories, which had presented an aspect so truly formidable at the commencement of my administration. The right has been established of every citizen to take his property of any kind, including slaves, into the common territories belonging equally to all the states of the Confederacy, and to have it protected there under the federal Constitution. Neither Congress nor a territorial legislature, nor any human power, has any authority to annul or impair this vested right. The Supreme Judicial Tribunal of the country, which is a coordinate branch of the government, has sanctioned and affirmed these principles of constitutional law, so manifestly just in themselves and so well calculated to promote peace and harmony among the states." Unquote. That from James Buchanan's third annual message, 1859. So there is no misunderstanding. I am not re-arguing slavery. Slavery is morally wrong and contrary to God's almighty law. In this divisive issue, the true attack was on our natural rights and on the Constitution. The core of the attack was on our right to possess allodial property. Our God-given right to own property in allodial was taken away by conquest of the Civil War. If you are free, this right cannot be taken away. The opposite of free is slave or subject. We were allowed to believe we were free for about 70 years. Then the king said enough, and had the slavery issue pushed to the front by the northern press, which so formed northern public opinion that they were willing to send their sons to die in the Civil War. The southern states were not fighting so much for the slave issue, but for the right to own property, any property. These property rights were granted by the king in the Treaty of 1783, knowing they would soon be forfeited by the American people through ignorance. Do you think you own your house? If you were to stop paying taxes, federal or state, you would soon find out that you were just being allowed to live and pay rent for this house, the rent being taxes to the king, who supplied the benefit of commerce. A free man, not under a monarch, democracy, dictatorship, or socialist government, but is under a republican form of government, would not and could not have his property taken. Why? The king's tax would not and could not be levied. If the Americans had been paying attention the first 70 years to the subterfuge and corruption of the Constitution and government representatives, instead of chasing the money supplied by the king, the conquest of this country during the Civil War could have been avoided. George Washington had vision during the Revolutionary War concerning the Civil War. You need to read it. See footnote 7. Civil War and the conquest that followed. The government and press propaganda that the war was to free the black people from slavery is ridiculous. Once you understand the Civil War 13th and 14th Amendments, the black people are just as much slaves today as before the Civil War, just as the white people are today. And also, we find ourselves subjects to the King and Queen of England. The only thing that changed for black people is they changed masters and were granted a few rights, which I might add can be taken away any time the government chooses. Since the 1930s, the black people have been paid reparations to buy off their silence. In other words, keep the slaves on the plantation working. I do not say this to shock or come across as prejudiced, because I'm not. Here's what Russell Means said. For those that don't remember who he is, he was the father in the movie The Last of the Mohicans. Russell Means said, quote, "Until the white man is free, we will never be free," unquote. The we he was referring to were the Indians. There has never been a truer statement. However, the problem is the white people are not aware of their enslavement. At the risk of being redundant, to set the record straight, because Lord only knows what will be said about what I just said regarding black people, I believe that if you are born in this country, you are equal, period. Forget the empty promises of civil rights. What about your unalienable natural rights under God Almighty? All Americans are feudal tenants on the land, allowed to rent the property they live on as long as the king gets his cut. What about self-determination, or being able to own a allodial title to property, which means the king cannot take your property for failure to pay a tax, which means you did not own it to begin with. The king allows you to use the material goods and land. Again, this is financial servitude. The ultimate ownership of all property is in the state. Individual so-called quote-unquote ownership is only by virtue of government, i.e. law, amounting to a mere user, and use must be in accordance with law and subordinate to the necessities of the state. That came from Senate document number 43, written in 1933. The king controlled the government by the time the North won the Civil War through the use of lawyers that called the shots behind the scenes, just as they do now, and well-placed subjects in the United States government. This would not have been possible if not for England destroying our documents in 1812 and the covering up of state documents of the original 13th Amendment. According to international law, what took place when the North conquered the South? First, you have to understand the word conquest in international law. When you conquer a state, you acquire the land, and those that were subject to the conquered state then become subject to the conquerors. The laws of the conquered state remain in force until the conquering state wishes to change all or part of them. At the time of conquest, the laws of the conquered state are subject to change or removal, which means the law no longer lies with the American people through the Constitution, but lies with the new sovereign. The Constitution no longer carries any power of its own, but derives its power from the new sovereign, the conqueror. The reason for this is the Constitution derived its power from the people, and when they were defeated, so was the Constitution. Montgomery's a little confusing there. Derived its power from the people. Anyway, seems to contradict what he'd written earlier about the Constitution. I think he clears it up later. He probably means privileges for the people. The following is the definition of conquest. Quote, the acquisition of the sovereignty of a country by force of arms, exercised by an independent power which reduces the vanquished to submission to its empire. The intention of the conqueror to retain the conquered territory is generally manifested by formal proclamation of annexation, and when this is combined with a recognized ability to retain the conquered territory, the transfer of sovereignty is complete. A treaty of peace based upon the principle of uti possidetis is formal recognition of conquest. The effects of conquest are to confer upon the conquering state the public property of the conquered state, and to invest the former with the rights and obligations of the latter. Treaties entered into by the conquered state with other states remain binding upon the annexing state, and the debts of the extinct state must be taken over by it. Conquest likewise invests the conquering state with sovereignty over the subjects of the conquered state. Among subjects of the conquered state are to be included persons domiciled in the conquered territory who remain there after the annexation. The people of the conquered state change their allegiance, but not their relations to one another, unquote. This from Lietensdorfer versus Webb. Doesn't say the year. Quote, after the transfer of political jurisdiction to the conqueror, the municipal laws of the territory continue in force until abrogated by the new sovereign. That from Bouvier's Law Dictionary under Conquest International Law. So what happened after the Civil War? Did not U.S. troops force the southern states to accept the 14th Amendment? The laws of America, the Constitution, were changed by the conquering government. Why? The main part I want you to see, as I said at the beginning of this paper, is watch the money and the commerce. The 14th Amendment says the government debt cannot be questioned. Why? Because now the king wants all the gold, silver, and copper, and the land, which can easily be done by increasing the government debt and making the American people sureties for the debt. This has been done by the sleight of hand of lawyers and the bankers. The conquering state is known as a belligerent. Read the following quotes. Belligerency is in international law. This is from Bouvier's dictionary. The status, quote, the status of de facto statehood attributed to a body of insurgents by which their hostilities are legalized. Before they can be recognized as belligerents, they must have some sort of political organization and be carrying on what in international law is regarded as legal war. There must be an armed struggle between two political bodies, each of which exercises de facto authority over persons within a determined territory and commands an army which is prepared to observe the ordinary laws of war. It is not enough that the insurgents have an army. They must have an organized civil authority directing the army. The exact point at which revolt or insurrection becomes belligerency is often extremely difficult to determine, and belligerents are not usually recognized by nations unless they have some strong reason or necessity for doing so. either because the territory where the belligerency is supposed to exist is contiguous to their own, or because the conflict is in some way affecting their commerce or the rights of their citizens. One of the most serious results of recognizing belligerency is that it frees the parent country from all responsibility for what takes place within the insurgent lines. That, unquote, that from Bouvier's Law Dictionary. Again, from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, belligerent in international law, as adjective and noun, engaged in lawful war, a state so engaged. In plural, a body of insurgents who, by reason of their temporary organized government, are regarded as conducting lawful hostilities. Also, militia, corps of volunteers, and others, who, although not part of the regular army of the state, are regarded as lawful combatants provided they observe the laws of war, unquote. According to the international law, no law has been broken. Read the following about military occupation. Notice the third paragraph. After the Civil War, title to the land had not been completed to the conquerors, but after 1933 it was. I will address this in a moment. In the last paragraph it says, the commander-in-chief governs the conquered state. The proof that this is the case today is the U.S. flying the United States flag with a yellow fringe on 3 sides. According to the U.S. Code, Title 4, Section 1, the United States flag does not have a fringe on it. The difference being, one is a constitutional flag, and the fringed flag is a military flag. The military flag means you are in a military occupation and are governed by the commander-in-chief in his executive capacity, not under any constitutional authority. Read the following. Military occupation from Bouvier's Law Dictionary. Quote, this, at most, gives the invader certain partial and limited rights of sovereignty. Military occupation. Until conquest, the sovereign rights of the original owner remain intact. Conquest gives the conqueror full rights of sovereignty and retroactively legalizes all acts done by him during military occupation. Its only essential is actual and exclusive possession, which must be effective. A conqueror may exercise governmental authority, but only when in actual possession of the enemy's country, and this will be exercised upon principles of international law. See McLeod versus U.S. The occupant administers the government and may, strictly speaking, change the municipal law, but it is considered the duty of the occupant to make as few changes in the ordinary administration of the laws as possible, though he may proclaim martial law if necessary. He may occupy public land and buildings. He cannot alienate them so as to pass a good title, but a subsequent conquest would probably complete the title. Private lands and houses are usually exempt. Private movable property is exempt, though subject to contributions and requisitions. The former are payments of money to be levied only by the commander-in-chief. Military necessity may require the destruction of private property, and hostile acts of communities or individuals may be punished in the same way. Property may be liable to seizure as booty on the field of battle. or when a town refuses to capitulate and is carried by assault. When military occupation ceases, the state of things which existed previously is restored under the fiction of post-liminium. Territory acquired by war must necessarily be governed, in the first instance, by military power under the direction of the President as Commander-in-Chief. Civil government can only be put in operation by the action of the appropriate political department of the government at such time and in such degree as it may determine. It must take effect either by the action of the treaty-making power or by that of Congress. So long as Congress has not incorporated the territory into the United States, neither military occupation nor cession by treaty makes it domestic territory in the sense of the revenue laws. Congress may establish a temporary government which is not subject to all the restrictions of the Constitution. See Downs versus Bidwell. That's unquote. That all about military occupation from Bouvier's Law Dictionary. Paragraph 1 through 3 of the definition of military occupation describes what took place during and after the Civil War. What took place during the Civil War and post-Civil War has been legal under international law. You should notice in paragraph 3 that at the end of the Civil War, title to the land was not complete, but the subsequent conquest completed the title. What was the next conquest? That would be 1933, when the American people were alienated by our being declared enemies of the conqueror, and by their declaring war against all Americans. Read the following quotes and also see footnote 8. The following are excerpts from the Senate Report, 93rd Congress, November 19, 1973, Special Committee on the Termination of the National Emergency, United States Senate. Since March 9, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. Under the powers delegated by these statutes, the President may seize property, organize and control the means of production, seize commodities, assign military forces abroad, institute martial law, seize and control all transportation and communication, regulate the operation of private enterprise, restrict travel, and in a plethora of particular ways, control the lives of all American citizens. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by states of national emergency, from at least the Civil War, in important ways shaped the present phenomenon of a permanent state of national emergency. In Title 12, in Section 95B, you'll find the following codification of the emergency war powers. The actions, regulations, rules, licenses, orders, and proclamations heretofore or hereafter taken, promulgated, made, or issued by the President of the United States or the Secretary of the Treasury since March 4th, 1933, pursuant to the authority conferred by subsection B of Section 5 of the Act of October 6, 1917, as amended in 12 U.S.C.S. 95A, are hereby approved and confirmed. March 9, 1933, C1, Title 1, 148, Statute 1. It is clear that the bankrupt de facto government of the United States, which is operating under the War Powers Act and executive orders, not the Constitution for the United States, has in effect issued under its admiralty law letters of marque or piracy to its private agencies, the IRS, ATF, FBI, and DEA, with further enforcement by its officers in the courts, local police, and sheriffs. They've waged war against the American people and have classed Americans as enemy aliens. The following definition is from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1934, of letters marque. It says, quote, a commission granted by the government to a private individual to take the property of a foreign state or of the citizens or subjects of such state as a reparation for an injury committed by such state, its citizens or subjects. The prizes so captured are divided between the owners of the privateer, the captain, and the crew. A vessel to a friendly port, but armed for its own defense in case of attack by an enemy, is also called a letter of marque. Words and phrases dictionary. The following is from Grinnin versus Edwards. By the law of nations, an enemy is defined to be, quote, one with whom a nation's at open war, unquote. When the sovereign ruler of a state declares war against another sovereign, it is understood the whole nation declares war against that other nation. All the subjects of one are enemies to all the subjects of the other, and during the existence of the war, they continue enemies in whatever country they may happen to be. Quote, and all persons residing within the territory occupied by the belligerents, although they are in fact foreigners, are liable to be treated as enemies, unquote. So we find ourselves enemies in our own country and subjects of a king that has conquered our land with heavy taxation and no possibility of fair representation. The government has, through the laws of forfeiture, taken prize and booty for the king, under the admiralty and executive powers as declared by the law of the flag, none of which could have been done with the built-in protection contained in the true and original 13th Amendment, which has been kept and memory hold from the American people. The fraudulent amendments and legislation that followed the Civil War bankrupted the American people and put the privateers, i.e. the banksters, in power, and enforced by the promise of prize and booties to their partners in crime, i.e. the government. The following is the definition of a tyrant. Webster's New Universal Unabridged Dictionary defines tyrant as follows, quote, 1. An absolute ruler, one who seized sovereignty illegally, a usurper. 2. A cruel, oppressive ruler, a despot. 3. One who exercises his authority in an oppressive manner, a cruel master, unquote. The following quote is from Alexis de Tocqueville, from Volume 1 of Democracy in America. Quote, when I see that the right and means of absolute command are conferred on a people or upon a king, upon an aristocracy or a democracy, a monarchy or republic, I recognize the germ of tyranny, and I journey onwards to a land of more helpful institutions, unquote. So we pick up with paragraph 4, which describes the taxation under military occupation, and that you are under executive control and are bound under admiralty law by the contracts we enter, including silent contracts, and by military occupation. Notice the last sentence in paragraph 5. Congress may establish a temporary government which is not subject to all the restrictions of the Constitution. See also Harvard Law Review, the Insular Cases. This means, folks, that you do not have a constitutional government. You have a military dictatorship controlled by the president as commander-in-chief. What is another way you can check out what I am telling you? Oh, read the following quotes. Quote, "The United States may acquire territory by conquest or by treaty, and may govern it through the exercise of the power of Congress conferred by Section 3 of Article 4 of the Constitution. In exercising this power, Congress is not subject to the same constitutional limitations as when it is legislating for the United States. And in general, the guarantees of the Constitution, save as they are limitations upon the exercise of executive and legislative power when exerted for or over our insular possessions, extend to them only as Congress, in the exercise of its legislative power over territory belonging to the United States, has made those guarantees applicable." Unquote. That from Hooven and Allison and Company versus Evatt, 1945. Quote, "The idea prevails with some indeed. It found expression in arguments at the bar that we have in this country substantially or practically two national governments. One to be maintained under the Constitution with all its restrictions, the other to be maintained by Congress outside and independently of that instrument, by exercising such powers as other nations of the earth are accustomed to exercise. I take leave to say that if the principles thus announced should ever receive the sanction of a majority of this court, a radical and mischievous change in our system of government will be the result. We will, in that event, pass from the era of constitutional liberty, guarded and protected by a written constitution, into an era of legislative absolutism. It will be an evil day for American liberty if the theory of a government outside of the supreme law of the land finds lodgment in our constitutional jurisprudence. No higher duty rests upon this court than to exert its full authority to prevent all violation of the principles of the Constitution." Unquote. That quote from Downs versus Bidwell, 1901. Okay, folks, this has been part 2 of "The United States is Still a British Colony" by James Montgomery. I'm Gordon Comstock. This has been The Ministry of Truth. This is The Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. Time for part 3 of "The United States is Still a British Colony" by James Montgomery. A military flag. And to further confirm and understand the significance of what I have told you in the previous 2 episodes, you need to understand the fringe on the United States flag. Read the following. First, the appearance of our flag is defined in Title 4, Section 1, U.S.C. Quote, "The flag of the United States shall be 13 horizontal stripes, alternate red and white. And the union of the flag shall be 48 stars, white in a blue field." Unquote. Parentheses, my note. Of course, when new states are admitted, new stars are added in parentheses. A footnote was added on page 1113 of the same section, which says, quote, "Placing of fringe on the national flag The dimensions of the flag and arrangement of the stars are matters of detail not controlled by statute, but within the discretion of the President as Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy." Unquote. The President, as military commander, can add a yellow fringe to our flag. When would this be done? During a time of war. Why? A flag with a fringe is an ensign, a military flag. Read the following, quote, "Pursuant to U.S.C. Chapter 1, 2, and 3, Executive Order, Number 10834, August 21st, 1959, 24 FR 6865. A military flag is a flag that resembles the regular flag of the United States, except that it has a yellow fringe bordered on 3 sides. The President of the United States designates this deviation from the regular flag by executive order and in his capacity as Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces," unquote. From the National Encyclopedia, Volume 4, quote, "Flag, an emblem of a nation, usually made of cloth and flown from a staff. From a military standpoint, flags are of 2 general classes. Those flown from stationary masts over army posts, and those carried by troops in formation. The former are referred to by the general name flags. The latter are called colors when carried by dismounted troops. Colors and standards are more nearly square than flags and are made of silk with a knotted fringe of yellow on 3 sides. ... Use of the flag. The most general and appropriate use of the flag is as a symbol of authority and power," unquote. The following quote is from Bouvier's Law Dictionary, 1914. Quote, "The agency of the master is devolved upon him by the law of the flag. The same law that confers his authority ascertains its limits, and the flag at the masthead is notice to all the world of the extent of such power to bind the owners or freighters by his act. The foreigner who deals with this agent has notice of that law, and if he be bound by it, there is not injustice. His notice is the national flag which is hoisted on every sea, and under which the master sails into every port, and every circumstance that connects him with the vessel isolates that vessel in the eyes of the world, and demonstrates his relation to the owners and freighters as their agent for a specific purpose, and with power well defined under the National Maritime Law," unquote. Don't be thrown by the fact they are talking about the sea and that it doesn't apply to land. Admiralty law came onto land in 1845 with the Act of 1845 by Congress. Next, a quote from the court case Roostrat versus People. Quote, "Pursuant to the law of the flag, a military flag does result in jurisdictional implication when flown. The plaintiff cites the following. Under what is called international law, the law of the flag, a ship owner who sends his vessel into a port gives notice by his flag to all who enter into contracts with the shipmaster that he intends the law of the flag to regulate those contracts with the shipmaster, that he either submit to its operation or not contract with him or his agent at all, unquote. I have had debates with folks that take great issue with what I have said. They dogmatically say the Constitution is the law and the government is outside the law. I wish they were right. But they fail to see or understand that the American people have been conquered, unknowingly, yet conquered all the same. That is why a judge will tell you not to bring the Constitution into his court or a law dictionary, because he is the law, not the Constitution. You have only to read the previous Senate's report on national emergency to understand that the Constitution and our constitutional form of government no longer exists. Further evidence: Social Security. I fail to understand how the American people could have been so dumbed down as to not see that the Social Security system is fraudulent and that it is based on socialism, which is the redistribution of wealth right out of the Communist Manifesto. The Social Security system, first, is fraud. It is insolvent and was never intended to be solvent. It is used for a national identification number and a requirement to receive benefits from the conqueror, i.e. king. The Social Security system is made to look and act like insurance. All insurance is governed by admiralty law, which is the king's way of binding those involved with commerce with him. The following quote is from Helvering versus Davis. Quote, "The Social Security system may be accurately described as a form of social insurance enacted pursuant to Congress's power to spend money in aid of the general welfare," unquote. Following quote is from Federal Judge Story in Delovio versus Boyd from 1815. Quote, "My judgment accordingly is that policies of insurance are within the admiralty and maritime jurisdiction of the United States," unquote. You need to know and understand what contribution means in FICA, the Federal Insurance Contribution Act. Read the following definition. Contribution, from Black's Law Dictionary, 6th edition. The right of one who has discharged a common liability to recover of another also liable. The aliquot portion which he ought to pay or bear. Under principle of contribution, a tortfeasor against whom a judgment is rendered is entitled to recover proportional shares of judgment from other joint tortfeasor whose negligence contributed to the injury and who were also liable to the plaintiff. The share of a loss payable by an insurer when contracts with two or more insurers cover the same loss. The insurer's share of a loss under a coinsurance or similar provision. The sharing of a loss or payment among several. The act of any one or several of a number of co-debtors, co-sureties, etc., in reimbursing one of their number who has paid the whole debt or suffered the whole liability, each to the extent of his proportionate share," unquote. Thereby making you obligated for the national debt. The Social Security system is one of the contractual nexuses between you and the king, because you are involved in the king's commerce and have asked voluntarily for his protection. You have accomplished the following. you have admitted that you are equally responsible for having caused the national debt, and that you are a wrongdoer, as defined by the above definition. You have admitted to being a 14th Amendment citizen who only has civil rights granted by the king. By being a 14th Amendment citizen, you have agreed that you do not have standing in court to question the national debt. Keep in mind, this is beyond the status of our country and people, which I covered earlier in this paper. We are in this system of law because of the conquest of our country. Congress has transferred its constitutional obligation of coining money to the Federal Reserve, the representatives of the king. This began after the Civil War and the overturning of the U.S. Constitution as a result of conquest. You have used this fiat money without objection, which is a commercial benefit supplied by the king's bankers. Fiat money has no real value other than the faith in it, and you cannot pay a debt with fiat money because it is a debt instrument. A Federal Reserve note is a promise to pay and is only evidence of debt. The benefit you have received is you are allowed to discharge your debt, which means you pass on financial servitude to someone else. The someone else is our children. When you go to the grocery store and hand the clerk a $50 Federal Reserve note, you have stolen the groceries and passed $50 of debt to the seller. Americans try to acquire as much of this fiat money as they can. If Americans were aware of this, it wouldn't matter to them because they don't care if the merchandise is stolen as long as it is legal. But what happens if the system fails? Those with the most fiat money or real property, which was obtained with fiat money, will be forfeited to the king. Everything that was obtained with this fiat money reverts back to the king. I will explain in the conclusion of this paper. Because use of his fiat money is a benefit supplied by the king's bankers, it all therefore transfers back to the king. The king's claim to the increase in the country comes from the original charter of 1606. But it is all hidden. Black is white and white is black. Wealth is actually debt and financial slavery. For those that do not have a Social Security number or think they have rescinded it, you are no better off. Well, there goes George Gordon's argument, I think. As far as the king is concerned, you are subject to him also. Why? Well, just to list a couple of reasons other than conquest, you use his money, and Gordon doesn't do that. And as I said before, this is discharging debt without prosecution. You use the goods and services that were obtained by this fiat money. Well, maybe Gordon's all right. He doesn't do that either. To enrich your lifestyle and sustain yourself. You drive or travel, whichever definition you want to use, on the king's highways and roads for pleasure and to earn a living, meaning you are involved in the king's commerce. On top of these reasons, which are based on received benefits, this country has been conquered. I know a lot of patriots won't like this. Your argument has been that the government has and is operating outside of the law, i.e. the United States Constitution. Believe me, I don't like sounding like the devil's advocate, but as far as international law goes, and the laws that govern war between countries, the King or Queen of England rule this country, first by financial servitude, and then by actual conquest and military occupation. The Civil War was the beginning of the conquest, as evidenced by the 14th Amendment. This amendment did several things, as already mentioned. It created the only citizenship available to the conquered and declared that these citizens had no standing in any court to challenge the monetary policies of the new government. Why? So the king would always receive his gain from his commercial venture. The amendment also eliminated your use of the natural rights and gave the conquered civil rights. The conquered are governed by public policy instead of republic of self-government under God Almighty. Your argument that this can't be is frivolous and without merit. The evidence is conclusive. Nothing has changed since before the Revolutionary War. All persons whose activities in king's commerce are such that they fall under this marine-like environment are into an invisible admiralty jurisdiction contract. Admiralty jurisdiction is the king's commerce of the high seas. And if the king is a party to the sea-based commerce, such as by the king having financed your ship, or the ship is carrying the king's guns, then that commerce is properly governed by the special rules applicable to admiralty jurisdiction. But as for that slice of commerce going on out on the high seas without the king as a party, that commerce is called maritime jurisdiction, and so maritime is the private commerce that transpires in a marine environment. At least that distinction between admiralty and maritime is the way things once were, but no more. What Lincoln and Jefferson said about the true American danger was very prophetic. This quote is from Abraham Lincoln. Quote, "All the armies of Europe, Asia, and Africa combined could not, by force, take a drink from the Ohio or make a track on the Blue Ridge in a trial of 1,000 years. At what point, then, is the approach of danger to be expected? I answer, if it ever reach us, it must spring up amongst us. It cannot come from abroad. If destruction be our lot, we ourselves must be its author and finisher." Unquote. The following quote is from Thomas Jefferson. Quote, "Our rulers will become corrupt, our people careless. The time for fixing every essential right on a legal basis is now, while our rulers are honest and ourselves united. From the conclusion of this war, we shall be going downhill. It will not then be necessary to resort every moment to the people for support. They will be forgotten, therefore, and their rights disregarded. They will forget themselves, but in the sole faculty of making money, and will never think of uniting to effect a due respect for their rights. The shackles, therefore, which shall not be knocked off at the conclusion of this war, will remain on us long, will be made heavier and heavier, till our rights shall revive or expire in a convulsion." Unquote. Below are the political platforms of the Democrats and the Republicans. As you can see, there is no difference between the two. Plain socialism either way. They are both leading America to a world government, just as Cornwallis said, and that government will be the British Empire or promoted by the British. The following is from the Democratic Party platform of 1936, quote, "We have built foundations for the security of those who are faced with the hazards of unemployment and old age, for the orphaned, the crippled, and the blind. On the foundation of the Social Security Act, we are determined to erect a structure of economic security for all our people, making sure that this benefit shall keep step with the ever-increasing capacity of America to provide a high standard of living for all its citizens," unquote. The following is from the Republican Party platform of 1936. It's a bit longer here. Quote, "Real security will be possible only when our productive capacity is sufficient to furnish a decent standard of living for all American families and to provide a surplus for future needs and contingencies. For the attainment of that ultimate objective, we look to the energy, self-reliance, and character of our people, and to our system of free enterprise. Society has an obligation to promote the security of the people by affording some measure of protection against involuntary unemployment and dependency in old age. The New Deal policies, while purporting to provide Social Security, have in fact endangered it. We propose a system of old age security based upon the following principles. 1. We approve a pay-as-you-go policy which requires of each generation the support of the aged and the determination of what is just and adequate. 2. Every American citizen over 65 should receive a supplemental payment necessary to provide a minimum income sufficient to protect him or her of want. 3. Each state and territory, upon complying with simple and general minimum standards, should receive from the federal government a graduated contribution in proportion to its own up to a fixed maximum. 4. To make this program consistent with sound fiscal policy, the federal revenues for this purpose must be provided from the proceeds of a direct tax widely distributed. All will be benefited, and all should contribute. We propose to encourage adoption by the states and territories of honest and practical measures for meeting the problems of employment insurance. The unemployment insurance and old age annuity of the present Social Security Act are unworkable and deny benefits to about 2/3 of our adult population, including professional men and women, and all engaged in agriculture and domestic service, and the self-employed, while imposing heavy tax burdens upon all," unquote. Both platforms appear in National Party platforms, 1840 to 1972, compiled by Ronald Miller in 1973. Conclusion. Jesus gave us the most profound warning and advice of all time. Hosea 4:6, "My people are destroyed by a lack of knowledge." This being our understanding and spiritual development in His Word. When applied to many facets of life, His Word exposes all of life's pitfalls. Jesus Christ's Word covers all aspects of life. The working class during the 1700s were far more educated than now, but this was still not enough to protect them from the secret subterfuge practiced by the lawyers and bankers. Only with understanding of Jesus Christ's Word can the evil application of man's law be exposed and understood for what it is. This is why Jesus also warned of the beguilement of the lawyers and the deceit and deception they practice. Another reason the working class have been unable to understand their enslavement is because of the time spent working for a living. At wages supplied by the upper class, sufficient to live and even prosper, but never enough to attain upper class status. This is basic class warfare. This system is protected by the upper class controlling public education to limit and focus the working class's knowledge to maintain class separation. What does this have to do with this paper? Everything. This is the reason our upper class forefathers submitted to the king in the Treaty of 1783. After this treaty, and up to the Civil War, the working class were busy making this the greatest country in the history of the world. You see, they believed they were free. And a free man will work much harder than a man that is subject or a slave. As a whole, the working class were not paying attention to what the government was doing, including its treaties and laws. This allowed time for the banking procedures and laws to be put in place over time while the nation slept, so the nation could be conquered during the Civil War. The only way to regain this country is with the re-education of the working class, so they can make informed decisions and vote, well, good luck on that, vote the mismanagers of our government out of office. As Joseph Stalin said, it's not who votes, it's who counts the votes. We could then reverse the post-Civil War socialist laws and the one-world government laws that have been gradually put in place since the Civil War. Until the defeat of America is recognized, victory will never be obtainable. Only through reliance by faith on Jesus Christ and the teaching of His kingdom will we realize our freedom. As I said earlier, just as this country has been conquered, when Jesus Christ returns, He conquers all nations and takes possession of His kingdom and rules them with a rod of iron. Revelation 11:15 to 18. His right of ownership is enforced by the law, God Almighty. The following quote is from Thomas Jefferson, quote, "And to preserve their independence, we must not let our rulers load us with perpetual debt. We must make our election between economy and liberty or profusion and servitude. If we run into such debts as that, we must be taxed in our meat and in our drink, in our necessaries and our comforts, in our labors and our amusements, for our callings and our creeds, as the people of England are, our people, like them, must come to labor 16 hours in the 24. Oh, yeah, that's what we have now. And give the earnings of 15 of these to the government for their debts and daily expenses. And the 16th being insufficient to afford us bread, we must live, as they do now, on oatmeal and potatoes, or TV dinners while the wife's at work as well as the husband, and nobody's watching the child. Have not time to think, no means of calling the mismanagers to account, but be glad to obtain subsistence by hiring ourselves to rivet their chains on the necks of our fellow sufferers." Unquote. Boy, Thomas Jefferson. He was so quotable and so brilliant, but at the same time, I don't think he understood that the people around him, the elitists around him, sold us out, as James Montgomery documents. All right. I'll just briefly go through some highlights of the voluminous footnotes that, especially just for an essay, that James Montgomery includes here. He starts out with the original charter for Virginia. The next footnote, too, though. Look at this. The Paris Peace Treaty, which supposedly ended the Revolutionary War with the United States as supposedly the winner. Well, look how it starts here. This is from the Paris Peace Treaty, ending the Revolutionary War. It, having pleased the divine providence to dispose the hearts of the most serene and most potent Prince George III, and it lists all of his titles. One of them is the Prince Elector of the Holy Roman Empire and the United States of America, to forget all past misunderstandings and differences that have unhappily interrupted the good correspondence and friendship which they mutually wish to restore. And it lists the fellow, it goes on from there, it lists the fellow co-signers: David Hartley, Esquire; John Adams, Esquire; Benjamin Franklin, Esquire; John Jay, Esquire. Those are all titles of nobility, showing that all four of those men were subject still to the King of Britain. But you will find that it's the king dictating the treaty here, dictating the terms of this treaty. The king, the supposed loser of this war, dictating the treaty. You see anything wrong with this picture? Okay, check out Article 4 here. Look how they snuck this in. Article 4 of the Peace Treaty. It is agreed that creditors on either side shall meet with no lawful impediment to the recovery of the full value in sterling money of all bona fide debts heretofore contracted. There you go. Just like David Astle pointed out in the Babylonian Woe, the front man for the bankers, in this case King George III, they will always cover for the bankers, always make sure the bankers, their bosses, get paid. But wait a minute, didn't we win the war? And we got to pay the king's bankers still? Okay. But basically, if you go through all the articles in the treaty, you'll see that it is, even as it started out, it's the King of England who is setting all of the terms. Article 1, 2, you name it. He was calling the shots. And since when does the loser in a war do that? The King of England was not the loser in that war. Moving on in history and in the footnotes, this is Jay's treaty from a few years later. Oh gosh, what year was this? It doesn't say. It'll say at the end, I suppose. But in Jay's treaty, look at this. Article 2 in Jay's treaty. His Majesty will withdraw all his troops and garrisons from all posts and places within the boundary lines assigned by the Treaty of Peace to the United States. What were British troops still doing there? Okay, and this was 13 years after the Treaty of Peace was supposed to have removed them. Folks, we didn't win that war. We did not win that war. Moving on. And the king's giving us all of our land that we're already supposed to have in this Jay's Treaty. Article 6. Whereas it is alleged by diverse British merchants and others, His Majesty's subjects, that debts to a considerable amount, which were bona fide contracted before the peace, still remain owing to them by citizens or inhabitants of the United States. Okay, the King of England is still dictating terms to the United States about debt collections for Britain here. You know, he's covering for the bankers again, making sure the king is making sure his banking bosses get paid, so that by the ordinary course of judicial proceedings, the British creditors cannot now obtain compensation for the losses and damages which they have thereby sustained. It is agreed the United States will make full and complete compensation for the same to the said creditors. What is the King of Britain doing dictating that if we really won that war, folks? Okay, Article 12 of Jay's Treaty. His Majesty consents, dictating again, that it shall and may be lawful, oh, thank you, during the time hereinafter limited, for the citizens of the United States to carry to any of His Majesty's islands and ports in the West Indies from the United States in their own vessels, not being above the burthen of 70 tons, any goods or merchandises, being of the growth, manufacture, or produce of the said states. And His Majesty also consents. Look at this. Look at the supposed loser of the war is consenting. The king is this is dictating terms. If the king had lost that war, this wouldn't happen. This is not the way it happened, as James Montgomery pointed out. When on the USS Missouri, when General MacArthur signed the peace treaty with the Japanese, it was MacArthur who dictated the terms because the United States won that war. Did we let Japan dictate the terms? No, because they lost the war. Well, here, the King of England's dictating the terms because of America. The United States did not win that Revolutionary War. And His Majesty also consents, provided all, giving us our ports and islands. Oh, thanks. Provided always that the said Americans do carry and land their cargoes in the United States only, the United States will prohibit and restrain the carrying of any molasses, sugar, coffee, or cotton in American vessels. Okay, just telling us where we can take our stuff to, where we can ship our goods to, and where we can't. The King of Britain in Jay's Treaty is dictating that. Why is the king dictating terms of American trading 13 years after the Treaty of Peace if America really won that revolution? America didn't really win that American Revolution. Article 18. In order to regulate what is in future to be esteemed contraband of war, all the above, and it lists a ton of stuff here, and it's all munitions. Anything having to do with munitions, petards, mortars, muskets, cannon, bandoliers, gunpowder, etc., etc. All of the above articles are hereby declared to be just objects of confiscation. Why is America agreeing to a wide variety of material to be confiscated by the British if America really won that revolution? We didn't win that revolution. Anything else I wanted to show? Maybe that's it. Something else I got highlighted here, and then we'll call it a day. Oh, wow. Congressman Beck had this to say about the 1933 War Powers Act. You'll find this under Congressman James Peck in the Congressional Record of 1933. Quote, I think of all the damnable heresies that have ever been suggested in connection with the Constitution, the doctrine of emergency is the worst. It means that when Congress declares an emergency, there is no Constitution. This means it's death. But the Constitution of the United States has a restraining influence in keeping the federal government within the carefully prescribed channels of power is moribund, if not dead. We are witnessing its death agonies, for when this bill becomes a law, If unhappily it becomes law, which it did, there is no longer any workable constitution to keep the Congress within the limits of its constitutional powers, unquote. There you go, folks. A congressman in 1933 declared that if the War Powers Act went through, which it did, he said, the country's dead. It's gone. And we were declared in that act alien enemies. And alien enemies, it's late. Alien enemies, defined in Bouvier's Law Dictionary, they're said to have no rights, no privileges, unless by the king's special favor during time of war. And it's one who owes allegiance to the adverse belligerent. That's us. Congratulations. We're slaves. And we're making bricks for Pharaoh. The difference between a guy like myself and people listening to the show and the rest of the country is we know they don't. They don't know they're slaves, folks. How sad. How sad. Oh, come, Jesus, come. This has been part 3 and the close of The United States is Still a British Colony by James Montgomery. I tell you what, I'm going to get into just one more essay by James Montgomery. I think it's going to be that the one called A Country Defeated in Victory, because he goes into greater detail on exactly how they pulled off the shenanigans how the founding quote-unquote fathers pulled off the shenanigans of making us believe the Constitution was one thing when it really was not. It was so there'll be a couple more shows about James Montgomery, and that'll be that. But this has been his essay, The United States is Still a British Colony. So stop hearkening. Stop referring back to the Constitution. It meaningless. Gone. It never meant anything. It gave us some privileges. Okay, this has been the Ministry of Truth. I'm Gordon Comstock. Thank you for listening. Over and out. Come, Jesus. Come.